Shalom Aleichem Rabbosai. I'm Rabbi Spivak. This, the third in our series in Jewish history. And in the previous program, we talked about the question of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai and the momentous decision he made when he faced, in the year 70, Vespasian, the Roman general soon to become part of an emperor ruling body, faced him on the outskirts of Jerusalem, and he had an opportunity, say some of his critics, to ask that the Romans leave the city of Jerusalem alive or go somewhere else. We know what Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai did. He asked for the city of Yavne v'chachomeho, Yavne and its students, its wise men, its sages. The question we brought up, why was it that Jerusalem, Yerushalayim, was left, and he did not ask for that city to be spared? And the answer is that the lifeblood of the Jewish people is its learning, its Torah. And Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, according to some, felt that it would be to ask too much for Jerusalem. But others say that there were terrible problems in that city at that time. Civil war, all kinds of hatred between Jews. And Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai had to start anew, fresh. So he asked for the city of Yavne. And it was in the next 500 years that the Mishnah and the Talmud were put down. They were written. They were known as the oral law before that. What is the Mishnah? What is the Talmud? What are these things? How do they relate to the Jewish people? We know of the Torah. Now we talk of the Mishnah and the Talmud. To get an idea of what the relationship between Mishnah, Torah, and Talmud is, let us take the issue of Jewish marriage. Jewish marriage. Now you think that the rabbi blesses, some viewers think the rabbi blesses the couple. It's not the same in the Catholic faith as it is in Judaism. As I understand it in Catholicism, marriage is one of the 7 sacraments of the church. In Judaism, marriage is not a sacrament of the synagogue, of the temple. Marriage is a relationship of sanctity entered in between a man and a woman. The rabbi acts not as the one who blesses the couple, although he may in a less formal manner than another faith, but rather to make sure that the marriage relationship, the marriage ceremony takes place correctly. So in order to understand the relationship between Mishnah and Talmud and Torah, let us understand the times that these things took place. The Torah was written some 300 years ago, and we'll show on our screen now, if we can, a picture of a passage in the Torah which talks about marriage. Ki yikach ish isha uva'ala, that a man will marry a woman. This is the passage written in the Torah on parchment 3,300 years ago, given at Mount Sinai. However, along with that was an oral tradition, which meant there were laws and commentaries and concepts on that Torah tradition that was not written down 3,300 years ago, but later, in a later period of time, after the destruction of the temple, approximately you're talking about another 12 or 1,300 years later, the first temple. There was a period after the Jews came into Egypt, came into the land of Canaan, the Holy Land. There was a period of 400 years of judges, 400 years of the first temple, and 400 years of the second temple. You're talking about 1,300 or 1,400 years after the Torah was given. There began the period where the Mishnah and the Talmud were written down. The Mishnah, you will see in the next shot here on the screen. This is the Mishnah, the part in the top there, in the decorative part, which is a commentary on what we just saw in the Torah. The Torah says a man will marry a woman. The Mishnah begins, Ha'isha niknis b'shalosh derachim. The marriage ceremony between a man and a woman can take place in 3 manners. And this is the commentary on the Torah. The Mishnah is the commentary on the Torah. Now, at the bottom of the page, or halfway through the center of the page, you will see, if I may point to it, this would be the Mishnah. Down here would be the Talmud. Now, the Talmud portion, or the Gemara portion, is yet another commentary, the commentary on the Mishnah. So you have 3 commentaries. Well, you have 3 concepts in Jewish law. The Torah, which we just saw before. Then, about 15 or 1600 years later, the Mishnah, which was a commentary on the Torah. And then you have the Gemara, which is a commentary on the Mishnah. But Jews being as they are, that is not enough. There is more in that than just that commentary. And you're talking about here commentaries such as Rashi and Tosfos. I'll show them to you in a moment. But let's go on to the next commentary or a code after the Mishnah and the Gemara. And you'll see it coming up. This is the Eben Hoezer, which is part of the next commentary or next code of Jewish laws called the Shulchan Aruch. The Shulchan Aruch was codified by Rabbi Yosef Karo some 425 or 430 years ago in Tzfat, in the Holy Land. And this has become the major portion of study in rabbinic literature, the Shulchan Aruch, after, of course, the Mishnah and the Gemara. What is studied? In other words, something has to be taken down from the Torah, the passage in the Torah, then the Mishnah, then the Gemara, and after that you have the Shulchan Aruch, the code of Jewish law. Now, these concepts, if we've just said them before, let me spell them out again, if I may, here on our board. The first commentary would be the commentary of the Mishnah, as I said, rather of the Talmud on the Torah. All right. I seem to be missing my pens, which I'll find momentarily. Here they are. Yes, Eddie.
You said the Talmud and the Mishnah were oral law before they were written down.
That's right.
You know about how far back that goes?
All right. Now, if we can see this on the board, I'll go through that. About in a time scale, we're going to make some kind of time scale. I hope that's legible. If we made a time scale, the Torah itself at Mount Sinai was given some 3,300 years ago. In other words, years ago. Along with the Torah on Mount Sinai, there was given, along with this written law, there was also given an oral law, an oral tradition. But this was not written down until 400 years, again, 400 years of the judges, 400 years of the first temple, 400 years of the second temple. This was not written down until some 1,600 years later. The actual writing of the Mishnah, which is the next commentary on the Torah, even though it was given before, the Mishnah was written down approximately 1,850 years ago. Now, then came the Talmud, the Gemara. And this period goes approximately to about 1,400 years ago. We're going back from our period now. These are approximate dates. So we find that there was about a 400-year period of the Mishnah and the Gemara. Then, about 400 years ago, the Code of Jewish Law, the Shulchan Aruch. This gives you an idea of the time periods that these things were written in. Now let us look at another concept of what Mishnah and Gemara look like. Now I know that a lot of you notice, or you've heard of the concept of kosher food. What is kosher food? What does it mean? Some people are under the misconception that it's food that's blessed by a rabbi. That's not correct. Kosher food is directly related to certain laws about what is permitted and what is not permitted in terms of what a Jew may eat and how the meat is treated and the blood being drained out, deveined, etc. Let us take a look at a typical page of the Talmud, if we may. Again, if we start from the beginning of the Talmud, we will see the Mishnah, which is right here, very short one in the beginning, the Mishnah and the Gemara. The Mishnah being a commentary on the Torah, the Gemara being a commentary on the Mishnah. At the left side, or the inside of every page of Talmud, there is a commentary. He appears here on this page, and then he appears here. He's always on the inside. And that commentary is known as Rabbi Shlomo ben Yitzchak, better known to you as Rashi, who lived in Troyes, France. Rashi wrote commentaries on Torah, on Gemara, on many, many subjects. And he lived from 1040 to 1105, about 800 to 900 years ago, did Rashi, in Troyes, France. Rashi, again, is on the inside of the page. He gives a commentary on the Mishnah and on the Gemara. On the outside of every page, meaning the outside here and the outside here, are the sons-in-law and grandchildren of Rashi, who had 5 daughters, and they are known as the Balei Tosfos. They also lived in France, Germany, various other places. Rashi, generally speaking, gives a commentary, a straight commentary on the explanation. Tosfos goes into a finer line definition and concept, generally speaking, than does his illustrious either father-in-law or grandfather. There were a number of people called the Balei Tosfos. But the Talmud doesn't stop there. The Talmud goes on, the study of Gemara goes on, and we come to the next concept in here, which is what we call the Shulchan Aruch. The Shulchan Aruch is a further commentary, or actually a code, on the Gemara. The Mishnah gives you laws. The Gemara talks about these laws. And then you come to the Shulchan Aruch of 400 years ago, Rabbi Yosef Karo. And let's take a look at that same laws being brought down even further. Here is the laws of how an animal is slaughtered according to Jewish law, Hilchos Shchita. And here you have the code of Jewish law, Rabbi Yosef Karo. Now, Rabbi Karo lived in Sfat. If we take a look at, let's find a page that's more illustrative of what I'm trying to talk about. Rabbi Karo lived in Sfat, and he generally gave laws for Sephardic Jewry, for the Jews of Spain and of the Morocco. His laws are generally followed by Sephardic Jewry. They're followed by all of us, as there's no one that disagrees. However, there were Ashkenazic Jews who followed a different rabbi. That rabbi would be found on the bottom here in the smaller print. His name was Rabbi Moshe Isolish. His tombstone is still in Krakow to this day. You're talking about absolutely God-fearing men in their piety, in their scholarliness, the brilliance of these people. Rabbi Karo lived a relatively long life. Rabbi Isolish died at the age of 33, according to most traditional historians, and he only had 2 years or so to see what Rabbi Karo had wrote. And he writes his commentary on it. In other words, he will take a law, for instance, a law about how the knife has to be when during the slaughter of an animal, and Rabbi Karo will give the law, his view of it, and then Rabbi Isolish, the Ramah, will comment on it. Either he agrees or he disagrees. The Mechaber, Rabbi Yosef Karo, generally speaking, Paskin, as we say, he was the decisor for Ashkenazic Jewry, Germany, Russia, Poland, and again, Rabbi Isolish was the commentary for the Ashkenazic Jewry. And Rabbi Karo was the commentary for the Sephardic Jewry. If I said it opposite, let's get it straight. Rabbi Karo was the commentator and the decisor for Sephardic Jewry, and Rabbi Isolish was the commentator for Ashkenazic Jewry. Now, further down the line are more commentaries from the Shach and the Taz, who very often disagreed as to finer interpretations of the law. So you see what is happening with Judaism. You may confront it in song and in music and in prayer. Judaism is a religion of the scholarly Torah scholar, and the discussions that are brought down so many times in our history. That is a brief discussion of what happened during the time of the Talmud. Eddie, you have a question?
The Shulchan Aruch, is that basically a debate?
Shulchan Aruch is basically the actual laws, the codes, based on these things.
But you say some agree and some disagree.
Well, they agreed or disagreed as basically on the law. In other words, one person would say who is permitted. This person is permitted to act as a ritual slaughter, and the other commentator will say no, he is not.
Okay.
Right. Rabbis would disagree on various topics and subjects in the law, and these are some of the things that the Talmud would deal with. And would discuss. But the Talmud did not only deal with laws about marriage or laws about such issues of kosher meat or non-kosher meat, etc. The Talmud also dealt with questions of life and death and spiritual matters for the Jewish people as well. Give you an idea, there is a Shulchan Aruch, a code of Jewish law written through the tradition of the Lubavitcher Chasidim, known as the Rav Shulchan Aruch. Now, he talks about, we just talked about marriage, we talked about various other or animals, the kosher animals, etc. But there were many cases of missionaries and people trying to take Jews away from their faith. And here is an interesting law that is written in the Rav Shulchan Aruch. He discusses the following. He says, anyone who knows, if a person knows that on the Sabbath they took his daughter from his house to take her away from being Jewish, either through a cult or a missionary group or they took her by, but it's not forced. This is here he's speaking about a group that took her away to try to influence her, mind influence. So he says you have to get up, even on Shabbos, and you have to go out on the way and walk out of the path, I'm translating, and to, as far as you have to go, and bring her back. And even to do laws to violate the Sabbath, because there is no greater issue in Jewish law than the issue of saving a Jew from being taken away from his faith. So these are some of the laws. These are some of what is happening to the Jewish people at this particular time in history. They now develop into a nation in many ways, or they put their scholarliness down on paper, they put it down on parchment. They have now developed the Jewish people and the intellect of the Jewish people. And those of you who wonder why, who say, well, the Jews so smart, it's not a matter of Jews being smart or not smart. It's being a matter of having an intellectual tradition. What is so interesting about this and what is so difficult about being a Jew is that in other faiths you have what is known as dogma. You're told what to do. A child is told this is right and this is wrong and this is the law and this is how I have to follow. And we have that on a limited scale in Judaism on the necessities. But when a youngster opens up the Talmud and he sees that one rabbi says like this and another rabbi says like that, and they will disagree, or that the Mechaber Rabbi Isserlish will disagree, the Mechaber Rabbi Karo will disagree with Rabbi Isserlish, or that Rashi will disagree with Tosfos, or that many of the commentators will disagree with each other. He begins to understand that there is a different side to every story, that there is another way of looking at it. Throughout the centuries, Jews have been the ones who've led social revolutions. They have been discoverers of things. They've won Nobel Prizes far out of their proportion to their numbers. And one of the reasons for this is the tradition to challenge. You know, there's an old saying, it's a joke, 2 Jews, 3 views, that there's always another way of looking at it. That is part of the tradition of the Talmud, the ability to look at things in a new and unique way, to be mechadesh. It's one of the things that is greatly encouraged. And so what happens in these particular cases are that the Talmud taught that one has to be able to look at things in different ways. And if you just don't accept the dogmatic view of things, you begin to look at things in a different way, then that's what leads to discoveries and inventions. But of course, the major purpose of a Jew's life is the study of the Torah. Kihi chayechem, this is our life, and kihem chayenu v'orech yomenu, they are our life and the length of our days. You have a question, Eddie, or something you were asking me about? This is yes.
I was wondering about what you were talking about between the disagreements.
Yes.
You say that's basically a Jewish trait to go out and challenge.
That's right, but stay within the framework of Judaism. I mean, challenge and yet keep the faith alive. But when you have to have a final opinion on certain things, and this final opinion that you have, this kind of thing, is you have to accept. When you have aseh l'chorav, when you make yourself a rabbi, you have to be able. And it's a difficult concept for people to say, well, are we supposed to challenge or are we not supposed to challenge? This is the difficulty. Yes, we're supposed to challenge intellectually, but we have to come to the final opinion, and that we must accept. And you have to make yourself a rabbi and accept that final opinion. That's the major concept in Judaism, accepting a final opinion on certain things, but knowing that there are other views. It's very hard for for many people to understand this and to accept this concept. What do you mean? Don't tell me the other point of views. We do as Jews a very difficult thing. We take our children and we want to train them and we want to make them good Jews and we want them to follow a path, and yet we teach them to challenge opinions. We teach them to challenge authority, and to say just because the man has the mantle of a rabbi doesn't mean you don't have the right to challenge the logic of his thinking. And on the contrary, you should challenge the logic of his thinking. And you will see where in other faiths, if a child gets up in a religious setting of another faith and challenges the teacher's thought, he can be punished, corporal punishment or whatever. The greatest pleasure in a yeshiva that a rebbe, a teacher, can have is if his student asks a question, an eisen kasha, an ironclad, hard, difficult question. And this is the greatest pleasure that a teacher can have. He feels the greatest honor that his student, and through his teaching, a student has asked a question that is difficult to answer. And yet, that student has to be able to know to challenge even his rabbi, even his teacher intellectually. But when it comes to halacha l'maaseh, when it comes to the actual carrying out of the law, that person, that child And that student, or that student can be an older person, must realize that he has to follow one rule, one law. It's, the history of democracy, where freedom of speech comes about. Jews were always in the forefront of these things. America encourages challenging leaders, and encourages challenging people, and yet, when it comes to the bottom line, when the light starts red, you may have freedom of speech, but that doesn't give you the right to go through a red light. Yes, Eddie.
I was wondering, what happens when the student's conclusion is different from the teacher in the end?
When the student's conclusion is different from the teacher, if the student, you ask a very delicate question.
I know this.
If, and you have the right to disagree with my answer too, if the student challenges the logic of the teacher, and the teacher cannot answer the student's logic, it's a rare occasion to accept the teacher, but it happens, and the teacher has to re-examine his position.
Are you kidding?
No. Teacher has to if a student comes up with a reason, I mean, this doesn't happen all the time, then a teacher can re-examine his position.
Not a total position, just a position.
On that, if a student comes in and he says a svara, which is a piece of logic, that the teacher can't answer, there are occasions when the teacher might change his point of view. There are occasions. I said re-examine. I don't want to make a sweeping statement. It's also, the Talmud talks about how difficult it is for teachers to appreciate the fact that students have become something. Talmud tells a very interesting story about a teacher that had a student that left him, and the student, whenever the teacher would come out with a decision, the student in the other land would come out with a decision the opposite of him. So why did he do that? I mean, why would he do that with his teacher? And the answer is that it's very difficult. He sent him back a letter to the student. Gidiyim naset yashim. The little lambs have become rams. The goats have become, the kid goats have become rams. It's hard for a teacher to realize that his student has reached an intellectual capacity that enables him to become a decider of Jewish law. I've heard this from great deans of rabbinical schools. So again, this give and take concept in Judaism, how we decide laws, how we decide things, and if Jews are known as being argumentative, that shouldn't be confused. Argumentative with the tradition of challenging ideas and challenging concepts, and yet staying within the framework of law. And what is the most interesting thing that I find fascinating, is that some of the people who encourage the most to challenge points of view, and they encourage are the strictest in their own personal lives. They are able to differentiate between that which they have to do and the complete challenge. Interestingly enough, many of the rabbis suffered terribly oppression. There was tremendous envy on the part of other nations about the intellectual capacity of the Jewish people, the Am HaSefer, the people of the book. But from this, we will study Jewish history from this concept, the training of the mind. From that all thoughts flow. The training of the mind, and yet the training of the spirit. These were two things which are difficult. Really, Judaism requires of each person to be a spiritual person and to be a person of the intellect, of logic, which sometimes is difficult for certain people to achieve. Why? Because logic says you must use rules and interpretation. The Spirit says you let your feelings for God take over. We talked about the Kabbalistic concept of the feelings. One of the greatest Kabbalists said that the highest form of music is a nigun. A nigun means that there are no words to it, that you relate to God just through the music itself. So this is the challenge of being Jewish. On the one hand, there are tremendous intellectual demands that you follow logic and you follow a svara and you follow rules in that way. And on the other hand, there is this tremendous requirement of being a spiritual person. So you have to know, and the ultimate, say many of the commentators, is to mesh the intellectual with the spiritual. That's the ultimate goal of a person, to be able to do that. Yes, Ed?
The sad thing is, basically, modern Jewry today only knows the rules, but they don't know the meaning behind it.
Well,
and that's where it can grow weak.
Well,
the meaning is important too.
Meaning is very important. Mixing them together, meaning and knowing why you're doing it. You have to understand that we have problems of people who maybe consider themselves experts on Judaism only remember the mitornish, when you're not allowed to, this you can't do, or that you can't
remember
do.
The traditions.
They remember what they were barred from doing. The whole framework of halacha, of Jewish law, is there to create an atmosphere so that a person can relate spiritually to God. That's the whole framework of halacha, the whole purpose. But sometimes people don't understand what the purpose is for. When we tell a person, Shabbos, you don't turn on lights, Shabbos, you don't get in a car, that person can look at it as a restrictive situation, which from a certain point of view, if you want to go to the beach or to the show, it is. However, if you want to withdraw from the mundanities of life, then you get away from the lights, and you get away from the television, and you get away from all these things, and you make yourself a spiritual person by withdrawing from all of the cares and the problems. I can tell you that people who see people celebrate Shabbos, and Shabbos is not a day where you can't celebrate. It's a celebration of Shabbos. It's a celebration of the human being as a spiritual person. And these laws are there to create that spirit. These concepts that I've talked about up to now, I don't know how much time I have left in the program at the moment, but I guess somebody will tell me soon, is the concept of being able to raise oneself to a high spiritual plane. That's where it's at. Again, there were tremendous sacrifices made for the Torah. We read on Yom Kippur about the Asora Haruge Malchus, the 10 martyrs. There was a friction between the occupiers of the Holy Land and the Jewish people. Friction first by the Greeks, who were mostly into the physical pleasures of life, versus the people who were into the intellect, the Jewish people. There was also a great period at this time when the Talmud was written, or right after it, during the Roman occupation. The Talmud is filled with stories where Roman generals and leaders tried to challenge the intellect of the Jewish people. You have cases of Rabbi Hanina ben Tradion, who was told not to study the Torah, and he went ahead and studied it anyway. And his punishment was that he was taken and the Torah. He was wrapped in the Torah, and pieces of wet wool were put next to his heart, and he was lit a fire. And how he suffered, how other great rabbis suffered because they wanted to study Torah. In our own day, we have seen what happens, the risks that Jews of the Soviet Union have taken in order to study Torah. And what is so interesting and perhaps ironic is in America, where we are free to do as we please in the study of Torah, the interest on the part of so many wane. You cannot, my friends, appreciate or understand the greatness of Torah unless you have been into it, unless you have gone to a class, unless you've picked up a book. You really have been denied your Jewish heritage unless you do that. This period in history, as I said, from the beginning of the Common Era through the time for 500 years, when the Mishnah and the Talmud were finally committed to writing, was a period of great intellect for the Jewish people, of codifying the laws, and that is what we come up to at this time. We get into a little later period of time. We talk about the period of the Rishonim. The Rishonim were the rabbis who were commentators such as Rashi, who were commentators on the Gemara, on the Talmud, and Tosfos, who also was a commentator on the Talmud. And these rabbis, these great people, were able to complete their what they did and to give over something that is studied throughout Jewish history. You have a question or a comment on something we've said. Again, these are some of the concepts. Some of the great people of the time of the Talmud who disagreed. I'll give you some names right now. Some of the great yeshivas. One was yes.
I wonder if there are any more today that are qualified to do the same.
Well, we have begun to say. We say that niskatnu hadoros, that in the leadership of the Jewish people, in greatness, it gets less and less as we get further and further from Sinai. The further we get from Mount Sinai, the leadership is less. That doesn't mean the masses of people are learning less. The yeshivos that are open across the world, among the masses, it gets greater in some or wanes, depending upon the situation. But the leadership, as it gets further and further away from Sinai, gets less. Two of the great yeshivas that existed are named after the people Hillel and Shammai. Just to be consistent. Hillel and Shammai represented, aside from yeshivas, they are two different kinds of people. Hillel was a more lenient person. Shammai was a stricter person. We can understand the difference between the two of them in a story about, mentioned in the Talmud, that when somebody came to ask a ridiculous question to Shammai, he wouldn't tolerate it. Someone came to ask the same question to Hillel, he was more understanding and he took out time to discuss these things. These approaches of being very tough or being less or being more understanding reflect themselves in the halacha lamasa, in the actual laws given out by Hillel and Shammai. These are some of the people of the Talmud. The Talmud also contains allegorical stories that are just as they were agadita. All right, for instance, stories that have a moral message. One famous story in the Talmud is a person who died and he came back to life, and the rabbis asked him, "What did you see?" So he answered, "Olam hafuch ra'isi." When I was up in the next life, I saw an upside down world. Ho'elyonim lamata v'hatachtonim lamala. Those people who were in this world on the top were on the next world on the bottom, and those people who were in this world were on the bottom, the downtrodden. In the next world, they were on the top. So I saw an olam hafuch ra'isa, an upside down world from the way it should be. And the rabbis answered, olam bora ra'isa. You saw a clear world. The real way it should be is that many of the downtrodden in this world, who are honest, straightforward people, never get anywhere because certain people who make the rules are crooks. Okay, and therefore the crooks may be on the top, of the world. The drug dealers and the pimps may drive the fancy cars, and the people who are honest may not have the kind of money and struggle to pay the mortgage each month. But on the other hand, the truth of the matter is that the people who really are good in God's eyes sometimes are the people who are straight and who are honest. Now, you have been watching our program. This is Rabbi Spivak. If you have any questions or comments, we occasionally put our phone numbers up, and you can call us at any of the phone numbers that you happen to see. When you have a question, be in touch with us on the question. That's what the purpose of this program put out by MS is, to give you an opportunity to talk to us. Yes?
You said that the Shammai was the stricter individual.
Right.
How can he judge what is ridiculous to a ridiculous question? Does he judge it what's apparent to him or what's apparent to the person who's asking?
Evidently, he judged it what was apparent to him. He was less tolerant of a person not coming up to a certain level. He was less tolerant of it. He's generally stricter. Hillel and Shammai were a group where they were the Bar Plukta, meaning the group of the two that argue with each other. They were Bar Plukta to each other. Then you have two other great rabbis. I don't know if you can see this. Are we okay? Am I high enough? Okay, I'll have to move this out of the way. Nothing like wreaking havoc in a studio by moving a prop. Are we okay now? Okay. I've just violated one of the major rules of television. Never move a stationary prop. Rava and Abaye, they also disagreed on many, many concepts. Rava and Abaye, Hillel and Shammai. This is just a very simple overview. But what the student gets out of this is great rabbis disagree. Maybe I can take my intellect. What can I as a student contribute to this? All right, in the day in the life of a Jew, his spirituality in the morning, he davens, he prays, then he goes into the study of the Talmud and the study, and life becomes, he cuts through the mundanities of life to the higher elements of life of the spiritual and the higher elements of life of the intellectual and all of the garbage of life, the flotsam and jetsam that we all have to wade through every single day. He is above that. He prays to his God with talis and tefillin in the morning, and he studies the Talmud during the day. In the evening, there's a special thing called Tikkun Chatzos, which is to get up in the middle of the night and study the Talmud, and during the day, and at the middle of the day, to study both day and night. Do you have a question or comment on something we were saying?
I was saying about the rabbi concept, about the restrictive one on Shammai. Again, I'm going to refer to him again.
Yes.
He asked, does one rabbi have to understand that life's a learning process? So even though he's a rabbi, able to teach those who have reached a less intellectual level below him, he has to understand that there are others who are higher, that he's basically moving still upward. So he has to understand where the leniency must be put onto him. He has to also have leniency onto his students.
Yeah, and the other side of the coin that can be argued, and your point is well taken, is that he also has to stand for a higher level. He has to stand for the higher goal. He has to say, no, it's not enough. No, it's more. There always has to be a Hillel that says yes for every person. There has to be a Shammai that sets a higher goal also.
So be a better rabbi would be a sort of a combination between Hillel and Shammai.
The best rabbi is to be able to chanoch lanar al pi darko, to be able to relate to each person according to each person's needs. The Talmud tells us about itself, that a person will only study Torah from that which interests him. That's where he's going to study it from. And again, you're talking about the beauty of studying. If you would like interested in a study class, or you are viewers, or a tape, if you would like to study things on various subjects, Talmud or various things, give us a call or write us at the numbers that you see coming up on the screen. Really give your Jewish tradition a chance to experience this fulfillment of what it is. How much time do we have now? Because I want to go into how much time do we have? Okay, if somebody give me the signal with the hand so I can see how much time we have. Okay, that's good to know. All right, you our viewers won't know, but I do. At any rate, we have also talked about the concept. Let us continue, if we can, with take a sample, for instance. We talked in the beginning of the program about Jewish marriage. So let's take it down a little bit further, if we can, and see some various different customs of the concept of marriage. We talked about marriage in the Torah, and then in the Talmud, and then with the Gemara, and the Mishnah, and the Shulchan Aruch. This picture here, if you can see it, is a Turkish bride, the way the customs of the Jewish people in Turkey as far as getting married. This is a Taimonite, a Yemenite Jewish woman. This is the traditional marriage garments of a Yemenite Jewish woman, and they marry like this today. So this is concepts and customs we started about. Here's another example of it.
Very elaborate.
Yes. Ceremonies with honey, and these are the various customs that have come down into post-Talmudic periods. That is filling out the ksuba, which is a guarantee that the husband gives that he will support his wife. They don't have to go out and both work for IBM. The husband's responsibility is to support the wife. Basically, that's bottom line. And the ksuba that talks about that. That's the contract before the wedding. This is a ksuba being read. And these are some of the older ksubas. You call it the ketubah. That's right. The ketubah, depending on your pronunciation, talks about the husband will give to his wife afilu miglima be'al kaspoy, the shirt off his back, the responsibilities. Again, all of these things started from the Torah passage, went down into the Mishnah, and from the Mishnah it went to the Talmud, and from the Talmud to the Shulchan Aruch, the Code of Jewish Law.
It's literally a contract.
It's a contract. That's right. They talk about the prenups, prenuptial agreements. Now, I remember in the time of in the movies that I heard about of Doris Day and Rock Hudson, there was nobody needed prenuptial agreements. Everybody married for love. And today, this is a young person or a successful woman who's a banker. When she gets married, of course we sign prenuptial agreements. That was unheard of 20 or 30 years ago.
Today,
yes.
Today they could be having divorces because of love.
Right. It's an interesting concept of how things come back.
I have a question.
Yes.
It was at a recent wedding I was at. The bride walks around the room a certain number of
7 times.
I was wondering, why is that?
Well, all right, that is a Kabbalistic concept. I really would not go into all of that particular things. It's a deep Kabbalistic concept. And
I thought there was something mystical.
Oh, definitely a mystical concept. Definitely. All right. Let's go look for this. Is a ksuba again. This is under the chuppah. Various Jewish wedding customs. This is a Hasidic wedding. Again, the chuppah is there, dressing in what is the garb of the 14th century, 16th century Polish upper middle class. That's what Hasidic garb is, with the shtramel, the bekisha, the marriage under the chuppah, coming down the chuppah with a candle.
So that's where it basically stems from, the dress today?
Yes,
dress code today.
That's right. That's the way that non-Jews dressed in Poland in the 16th century. Here are some. The bride, even the concept of whether the bride's face should be covered completely or how thick the veil is. That's a disagreement in the Talmud. Go back. This is a wedding in Israel. Some brides will have, about 30 years ago, some brides will have very thick veils and some will not. This is a Turkish bride and groom, or Istanbul bride and groom of the 18th century. Another shot of that. This is what it was like to get married in Germany under the chuppah, let's say in the 19th century Germany. Notice the top hat. Notice the costumes or the clothing of the day. And again, wherever Jews were spread out, it's all over the world, whereas of other cultures were spread to different lands, they lost their identity. It was the Torah, it was the Talmud, it was the Mishnah, it was this learning that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai saw as the chain of tradition. This is more important to him to save even than Jerusalem, because this would keep the people going, no matter where they were or what they did. Their customs. Jews have a common language. Jews have a common heritage, even though their outer garb and the language they spoke day to day would be different. This is what unites Jews, and this was the vision of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai: the Torah, the Mishnah, the Talmud. Another wedding, modern day. This was a wedding in France. Again, the bride and the groom. Now, this is a very interesting. These were the rings that were used. Now, today in a Jewish wedding, we are very careful that the ring is a plain ring. Okay, very plain. What they would do in those days, 200-300 years ago, the communities had their own ring. It's important for the chatan, the chasan, the groom, to own the ring, so he would acquire the ring from the community, and every time someone would get married, they would use that particular ring from the community to get married with. Yes, Eddie?
Some of them look like buildings.
Yes, the idea of bayis nemon b'Yisrael, to build a faithful house among the Jewish people, royal faithful house. That's the idea behind the house, behind the ring. These were some of the rings. Although Tosfos is very careful to tell us that you should not have a ring with a stone in it, because the ring is one of the ways that the marriage ceremony is done, and the woman should not think that it's valued more than it actually is, because it would be a mekach tos. These are just some examples. A mistaken purchase. Yes.
It'd be like worshiping the appearance more than the content.
Well, and from a legalistic point of view, more that she would think she was entering into the marriage with the acquisition of a gift that she thought was worth more than it actually was. Here is another example of the chassan stepping on the cup. We remind ourselves in Lo Alas Yerushalayim Al Rosh Simchasi. One of the greatest things that we require is that the greatest pleasure or greatest joy of a person is the time he gets married. So we remember the destruction of Jerusalem by breaking a glass at the wedding. And the Sephardic Jews, some of them put ashes on their forehead, which is also a Talmudic tradition. But again, many of the customs came in later, but some of them go back, or the basic concept of the ring and the shava kesef kekesef, the value of money, is from the time of the Talmud, actually going back to Mount Sinai itself. Here is that moment where the chassan in the Hasidic wedding puts the ring on the bride's finger. But this particular ring, you don't put the third finger of the left hand, it goes on the right index finger. He says he recites the formula, as the rabbis say. He says the words of Harayat that causes the woman to be married to him. Part of the ksuba, under the chuppah. This is right after the chassan. The groom steps on the cup. There's dancing and singing and great joy. That's the actual breaking of the glass in the wedding. It's done 300, 400 years before. There was also a badchen. A badchen was a professional person who says, people want to call him a comedian. He would say things to bring joy to the bride and groom.
Almost like a jester.
Well, yeah, but a little more than that.
A little bit more respect.
Here's in Israel breaking the cup. Again. This is the badchen, a Polish badchen of the 17th century. He would be there to make people laugh. Joy. But he had special things. It wasn't just, jokes from the street. Special things. Another example of the badchen. Galicia, early 20th century.
Is that tradition used anymore today?
Pardon?
Is that tradition used anymore today with the badchen?
Yes, in Hasidic circles you see it a lot. In many circles you see that. But what happens is that the basic concept of the wedding. We could talk about Jewish divorce, unfortunately. We could talk about laws of kosher. We could talk about many things, and we could say that we could trace the laws down. This Torah is what was essential for Jewish survival. It was essential. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, we started this program by saying, why would Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai do the things he did? And we answered that by saying that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai would do it, realize that the source or the survival of the Jewish people depended essentially on Torah, on learning. And you who are watching this program, you've seen phone numbers and you've seen material addresses. If you would like some material from Emmis, if we can send it to you, we will. If you'd like some more information and you're out of New York State, call us on a toll-free 800 line. Inside New York State, you see the numbers to call. Write us. Tell us, Rabbi Spivak, I would like some more information. Call us. We would be happy to supply to Jews information on your heritage. You don't realize what a magnificent heritage you have, how Torah can answer the spiritual and intellectual needs of every human being who encompasses it. Torah is a magnificent thing. When I say Torah, I just don't mean the scrolls. I mean Torah, Mishnah, Talmud. I mean the customs, the laws that have come down throughout the ages. These are the most. This is when it says Ki heim chayenu v'orech yameinu. They are our life and the length of our days. And Eddie, you have anything else you want to ask me?
Well, I was just saying on the Kabbalah, it's also an oral law.
Well, Kabbalah is a much more deeper concept that has to be studied on a very, very delicate level.
I realize this, but I wonder if in general, was it given to Moses?
Yeah, of course he had those concepts, the spiritual concepts. It was written later, of course. I see that we're just about out of time. And so we want to tell you that you can reach us, again, by the phone numbers that you've seen, by the addresses that you've seen. And let us hear from you. If you want to find out what Jewish is all about, MS is the program that, or the organization that brings you this program. And you can write to us, or you can call us. And we want to thank you, our viewers, for being with us. Rabbi Spivak's class will be with you hopefully every week at this time. And for everyone here, this is Rabbi Yaakov Spivak saying, Seid gesund, lehitraot, shalom al Yisrael, and most of all, my friend, Chazak.
This is JMC, the Jewish Media Channel.